When I think back to the first time I realized that my family didn't see me the way I saw them, I feel this cold, hollow ache spreading through my chest. It's as if the child in me is still standing there, waiting for someone to reach out and reassure me that I wasn't invisible. My name is Claire. I'm 41 years old now, a woman who has lived enough years to carry scars both on my body and deep in my soul. I used to believe that family was sacred, that no matter what happened in the world outside, the people you shared blood with would be the ones to hold you when you fell apart. But what I learned, slowly and then all at once, is that blood means nothing when greed poisons the heart. I grew up in a modest but warm home in the Midwest, the kind of house with creaky stairs and wallpaper that always looked dated, no matter what my mom did to freshen it up. My parents weren't wealthy, but they worked hard. My father was a stern man, but he was fair, or at least I always thought so. My mother was gentle, the kind of woman who would tuck notes in your lunchbox just to remind you she loved you. I was the second child, sandwiched between my older brother Daniel and my younger sister Ruth. As a girl, I often felt like the overlooked one, the quiet middle child who learned to find joy in small, secret things. A book under the covers, a walk to the creek behind our house, a notebook filled with scribbles no one else would ever read. Daniel was the golden child. I knew it then, even before I had the words to understand it. He was confident, tall, with a smile that could melt anyone. Teachers adored him, neighbors admired him, and my parents looked at him as if he carried the family's destiny in his hands. He wasn't cruel to me outright, not when we were young, but there was always a distance, a superiority in the way he'd speak to me, a roll of the eyes when I tried to join in. And as we grew older, that distance turned into something darker, something sharper. Ruth, on the other hand, was the baby of the family, sweet, fragile, often shielded from the storms that raged between Daniel and me. I tried to protect her when I could, but more often, I just watched her being adored for her innocence, while I grew used to fading into the wallpaper. I don't say this out of bitterness, not anymore, but out of truth. I was the one who learned early on how lonely it can feel to be part of a family, yet somehow excluded from its heartbeat. When my father passed away, I was 33. He died suddenly, a heart attack in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday morning. I remember the phone call as if it's happening right now. The way my sister's voice cracked when she told me, the sound of her sobbing breaking into static. Grief washed over me like a tidal wave. My father was far from perfect, but he was my father. I still expected him to be there, expected his steady, gruff voice to anchor us. His death left a hole in our family, but it also lit a fuse that I didn't realize had been waiting for years. Because with death comes inheritance, and with inheritance comes the ugliest side of human nature. In those first weeks after the funeral, I tried to be the peacemaker. My mother was still alive then, fragile with sorrow but determined to keep us together. We gathered in a living room, the house heavy with silence, to talk about what would happen with the estate. It wasn't much, just the house, some savings, and a few sentimental possessions that each of us had quietly hoped would one day belong to us. My father had always told me, in private moments, that he believed in fairness. He didn't want one child to carry the burden or the privilege over the others. So when Daniel stood up and announced that he'd take care of things, something inside me bristled. I asked about the will. I knew my father well enough to believe he would have put his wishes in writing. Daniel looked me in the eyes with that same smirk he used to wear when we were kids and said, "There isn't one." Mom already knows that Dad trusted me to manage everything. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that despite our history, Daniel wouldn't lie about something so sacred. But as days turned into weeks, the questions gnawed at me. Why would my father, a man who planned every detail of his life, down to how he trimmed the hedges, not leave a will? Why would he suddenly entrust everything to Daniel, without a word to me or Ruth? My mother stayed silent, her grief like a curtain drawn across her face, and so I swallowed my doubts, buried them alongside my father, and tried to move forward. But grief has a way of loosening secrets. A year later, my mother passed away too. Her death was slower, drawn out by illness, and in that time, I became her caretaker. I sat by her bed, fed her soup, brushed her hair back when the sweat clung to her forehead. And in her final weeks, when the walls between us dissolved and she spoke more openly than she ever had before, she told me something that changed everything. "There's a will, Claire," she whispered one night, her voice so faint I had to lean in close. "Your father wrote it. Both of us did. It's in the safe." The safe. The same one Daniel had locked up after my father's funeral, insisting there was nothing inside but old insurance papers. My mother's words rattled inside me like loose bones. A will existed, and Daniel had hidden it. After she died, I confronted him. I remember that day vividly. The cold drizzle outside, the way my hands shook, not from the weather, but from rage. I asked him directly, "Where is the will?" He didn't deny it. He didn't even flinch. Instead, he looked at me with a kind of cruel amusement and said, "You don't need to worry about things you were never meant to have." I can't describe the way those words sliced through me. It wasn't just about money or property. It was about betrayal, about the realization that my own brother had stolen not only my parents' final wishes, but also the last shred of belonging I had in this family. When I told Ruth, hoping for support, she recoiled. She told me Daniel had already explained everything, that I was overreacting, that I was letting grief turn me into someone bitter and untrustworthy. The family turned on me so quickly, it made my head spin. Cousins, uncles, even my father's closest friends, all of them sided with Daniel. I was painted as the jealous middle child, desperate for attention, willing to invent lies to stir up drama. But I knew the truth. And once you know the truth, you can't unknow it. What followed were years of silence. I stopped attending family gatherings, birthdays, Christmases, weddings. I wasn't invited, or I chose not to go, knowing I'd only be met with glares and whispers. My world shrank down to myself, my work, and a few friends who became my lifeline. But at night, when the house was quiet, I would think about that will, locked away somewhere, gathering dust while Daniel lived off what wasn't his to claim. And with each passing year, my anger grew roots, digging deep into my soul. For a long time, I told myself to let it go, that revenge would only eat me alive. But anger has a strange way of transforming into fuel when you've been silenced for too long. And one day, I decided I wouldn't stay quiet anymore. The opportunity came unexpectedly. A distant cousin reached out to me after attending a family gathering at Daniel's house. He mentioned, offhandedly, that Daniel had shown him an old letter from my parents, a letter that sounded suspiciously like instructions for their estate. My heart pounded as he described it, and I realized then that the proof still existed. I just had to find a way to bring it to light. That was when I made the choice that would alter the rest of my life. I was going to dig up the truth, no matter how deeply Daniel had buried it. I didn't sleep the night I made that decision. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with fragments of memories, my mother's whisper replaying over and over. "It's in the safe." The safe that Daniel had claimed was empty. I could almost hear the metal click of it shutting, like a coffin sealing away not just papers, but the last pieces of my parents' love for me. I knew breaking into his house was out of the question, not just because of the law, but because Daniel was the kind of man who always had eyes on him. People adored him. Neighbors, co-workers, even strangers seemed to fall into his orbit while I remained invisible. If I tried something reckless, it would only confirm the family's belief that I was unstable. No, I needed patience. I needed to be smarter than him, so I began quietly gathering information. I reconnected with relatives who hadn't spoken to me in years, pretending at first that I only wanted to mend old wounds. Some of them were skeptical, but grief is a language people understand. and I used mine like a shield. Over cups of coffee and phone calls that stretched into the night, I listened, and little by little, stories slipped out. Daniel bragging about his new car, Daniel renovating the family house and talking about his inheritance, Daniel making comments about how our father always meant for him to be in charge. One night, after too many glasses of wine, an uncle admitted that Daniel had once shown him a folder of documents to prove he was handling things responsibly. My pulse hammered in my throat as I asked him what those papers looked like. He shrugged, said it was legal stuff, a lot of signatures, and then changed the subject. But I knew then, with a clarity that nearly burned through my skin, that the will wasn't just a whisper from my mother's lips. It existed, and Daniel had waved it around when it suited him. It took months of digging before I finally found my break. A friend of Daniel's, a man I had never trusted, got arrested on unrelated charges. In his desperation, he reached out to me, claiming he could help if I helped him. I didn't trust him, but when he told me he had once seen Daniel's safe and that Daniel had mentioned keeping family papers locked inside, I nearly collapsed. The rage inside me boiled, but beneath it was something else. Vindication. Still, information wasn't proof, and proof was the only thing that could pierce the web of lies Daniel had spun around me. I decided to confront Ruth again. By then, she was married with 2 children. Her life wrapped neatly in the security Daniel had gifted her through stolen money. I went to her house, carrying with me every ounce of hope that the sister I once loved was still in there somewhere. When she opened the door, her eyes narrowed, as if my very presence was poison. But she let me in, out of obligation more than affection. I sat at her kitchen table, watching her fuss over her children's toys, and finally, I said it. Ruth, I know there's a will. Mom told me before she died. Please tell me you believe me. Her face went pale for just a second, and I saw it. That flicker of recognition, of truth. But then she hardened. Claire, you need to let this go. You're tearing yourself apart over something that doesn't exist. It does exist, I shot back, my voice trembling. And you know it. I can see it in your eyes. She looked at me, and for the briefest moment her eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away, shaking her head. Daniel told me you'd do this. He told me you'd try to turn me against him. I won't let you. It felt like being punched in the stomach. My sister, the girl I used to protect, the one I used to braid hair for and share secrets with, was gone. She had chosen her loyalty. And it wasn't to me. I left her house that day with a new kind of grief, heavier than death. The grief of losing someone who was still alive, but I didn't give up. Instead, I turned to the law. It took everything in me to scrape together enough money to hire a lawyer. When I first told him my story, he looked skeptical. Cases like this are difficult, he warned. Without direct evidence, it's your word against your brother's. And he seems well connected. I don't care, I told him, my voice cracking. I just want the truth to come out. So we filed motions, requested access to estate documents, demanded transparency. Daniel fought us at every turn. He hired his own lawyers, slick men in expensive suits who treated me like a nuisance, a desperate woman chasing shadows. But slowly, piece by piece, their armor cracked. During discovery, we found evidence of accounts opened suspiciously close to my father's death. Transfers of money that didn't line up with Daniel's story. A notary's signature that hinted at paperwork being signed. Paperwork Daniel swore didn't exist. My lawyer leaned across the table one afternoon, his eyes sharp with something close to excitement, and said, "We're on to something." But it wasn't enough. Not yet. The turning point came when I received an anonymous envelope in the mail. Inside was a photocopy of a page, yellowed, creased, but unmistakably real. It was my parents' handwriting, their signatures at the bottom of a document titled Last Will and Testament. I cried when I saw it. My hand shook so violently that the paper nearly slipped from my grasp. It wasn't the full will, just a single page, but it was enough to prove that Daniel had lied. Enough to show that my parents had indeed left instructions for their estate. The question now was, who sent it to me, and why? Part of me wondered if it was Ruth, guilty enough to slip me proof in secret. Or maybe it was someone in Daniel's circle, someone he had wronged. Whoever it was, they had cracked open the door I needed. We took that page to court, and suddenly the tide shifted. Daniel's confident smirk faltered when the judge asked about the missing will. His lawyers scrambled, insisting the document was fake, that I had fabricated it. But the handwriting matched perfectly, and even relatives who despised me had to admit it looked authentic. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one on trial in my family's eyes. Daniel was, but exposing him wasn't as sweet as I imagined. Because with every revelation, the ugliness of my family bled out for the world to see. Relatives who once scorned me now whispered apologies, but their words felt hollow. They had abandoned me when I needed them most, and now they wanted forgiveness because the tide had turned. I smiled politely, but inside my heart remained cold. The climax came on the day of the full hearing. Daniel was forced to hand over the contents of the safe, and when the will was finally laid on the table, its pages fragile and yellow with age, I felt a rush of emotion so powerful I could barely breathe. My parents had left everything to be divided equally. Equally. That was all I ever wanted, to be acknowledged as their daughter, their child. Daniel had hidden that truth because he couldn't stand the thought of sharing. He had stolen years of peace from me, from all of us. When the judge ruled in my favor, my knees nearly gave out. The will was validated. My father's words lived again. My mother's whisper had been right. I had won. But what I didn't realize, standing in that courtroom with my tears soaking the collar of my blouse, was that victory doesn't erase betrayal. It doesn't bring back lost years or mend broken bonds. It just leaves you standing in the rubble, clutching a truth that came too late. The days after the ruling were a blur, as if I were walking through a dream that kept shifting between relief and sorrow. On paper, I had won. The court acknowledged the will, declared that everything should be divided fairly, and for the first time in years, my name wasn't synonymous with lies and delusion. But in my heart, the victory felt hollow. The news spread quickly through the family. Cousins who had avoided me now sent awkward text messages, sprinkling words like "congratulations" and "I always believed you," deep down. Aunts called to say they were sorry for misunderstanding, as if their silence hadn't cut me just as sharply as Daniel's betrayal. Even Ruth reached out, her voice trembling over the phone. "Claire, I didn't know what to believe. He convinced me." I hung up before she could finish, because the truth was, she did know. She knew there was something rotten at the core of his story, but she chose the comfort of siding with him instead of standing by me. And forgiveness isn't something you can hand out like candy. It has to mean something, and hers didn't. Daniel wasn't ready to let go. He called me one night, his voice like venom through the receiver. "Do you feel proud of yourself? You've ruined this family. You think Mom and Dad would be happy seeing you drag their name through the mud?" I laughed, bitter and cracked. "I didn't ruin this family, Daniel. You did, the moment you decided your greed mattered more than the truth." He snarled something I couldn't even make out before slamming the phone down. And that was it. My brother, the golden child, the man who once strutted through life as though he were untouchable, was left exposed. But instead of joy, all I felt was exhaustion. Because here's the thing about betrayal. Even when you expose it, the scars don't fade. The house that had once been my parents', the house with creaky stairs and faded wallpaper, was suddenly mine again, at least in part. Walking through those rooms after years of absence was like opening a time capsule filled with both love and pain. My mother's perfume still lingered faintly in the upstairs hallway. My father's chair in the living room still bore the indent of his frame. I touched the worn banister of the staircase and remembered the countless times I had run up those steps, chasing after Ruth or fleeing from Daniel's mocking words. But one evening, I found myself in the attic, surrounded by boxes my parents had packed away years before. Dust clung to my fingers as I sifted through old photo albums, yellowed letters, and school projects with my childish handwriting sprawled across them. And then I found something I wasn't prepared for. A stack of letters from my father, unsent, written to me. His words were careful, almost hesitant. He wrote about how proud he was of me for never giving up on myself, even when life seemed unfair. He admitted he worried that I always felt overshadowed by Daniel. In one letter he wrote, "Claire, I know you think I don't see you, but I do. You are stronger than you realize, and one day, when the world tries to take everything from you, you'll fight back, and you'll win, because that's who you are." I clutched those letters to my chest and sobbed in a way I hadn't allowed myself to in years. My father had seen me. He had known. The will wasn't just about money. It was about justice, about ensuring that I was recognized as his daughter, equally deserving of his love and legacy. But Daniel had stolen that from me, and no court ruling could give back the years I spent doubting my worth. The settlement was finalized months later. The assets were divided as the will had intended. I used my share not to buy luxury or to flaunt victory, but to rebuild the parts of myself that had been chipped away. Therapy, travel, writing. I began pouring my story onto paper, each word a stitch in the wound. I wanted to make sense of the chaos, to transform the pain into something that mattered. And yet, revenge would have been watching Daniel lose everything, watching him crawl on his knees begging for forgiveness. Justice was simply the truth, revealed at last. What I received was somewhere in between. Enough to prove I wasn't crazy, but not enough to erase the isolation of those years when no one believed me. Ruth tried again to reconcile. She showed up at my door one afternoon holding flowers, her eyes swollen from crying. "Claire, please," she begged. "We're sisters. We can't let him destroy us." I stood in the doorway, the weight of decades pressing on me. I thought of the little girl who once held my hand on stormy nights, who whispered secrets into my ear. And I thought of the woman who turned her back on me when I needed her most. "I love you," I told her honestly, "but I don't trust you. And without trust, there's nothing left to rebuild." Her tears fell harder, but I didn't step aside. I watched her walk away, and though my heart cracked, I knew it was the right choice. Some bridges, once burned, are never meant to be rebuilt. As for Daniel, I haven't spoken to him since that night he called to spit venom into the phone. Word has it he moved away, started over somewhere else, carrying his shame like a shadow he pretends doesn't exist. Sometimes I imagine him looking in the mirror, seeing the smirk that once made him untouchable, and wondering where it all went wrong. I don't need to know, because my story isn't about him anymore. It's about me, about reclaiming the voice that was stolen, about finding strength in the wreckage. One night, sitting alone in the old family house, I lit a candle and read my father's letters again. His words glowed in the flickering light, and I realized something I wish I had understood long ago. I had always been seen. Maybe not by Daniel, maybe not by Ruth, maybe not by the family who dismissed me, but by my parents, by the people who mattered most, and by myself. That was the real victory. When people ask me now if I regret it, if I regret the years of fighting, the sleepless nights, the loneliness, I tell them this: regret is for those who never act. I fought for the truth, even when it cost me everything else. And though the scars remain, I carry them with pride, because they are proof that I survived, and survival, in the end, is the sweetest kind of revenge. The candlelight flickered in that old house, shadows stretching across the faded wallpaper, and I realized I wasn't afraid of the silence anymore. For so long, silence had meant exile, being cut out, cast away, dismissed as the bitter, jealous one. But now silence meant peace. It meant I could finally breathe without the weight of proving myself pressing down on my chest. Still, healing isn't a straight path. Some mornings I woke with a heavy sadness, remembering all the holidays I'd missed, all the years wasted while Daniel strutted through family gatherings with stolen pride. Other mornings I woke lighter, proud of myself for never letting go of the truth. I learned to let both feelings exist side by side, the grief and the gratitude, the pain and the pride. I began journaling daily, pouring the memories out onto paper like I was bleeding ink. I wrote about the nights I cried myself to sleep after Ruth accused me of lying. I wrote about the way Daniel's smirk used to ignite a rage so deep I could barely speak. And I wrote about the letters from my father. How his words reached me across the grave, wrapping me in the embrace I had longed for my entire life. It was in those pages that I started to see a pattern, not just of betrayal, but of survival. Each scar, each wound was a mark of endurance. I wasn't the weak middle child who faded into the background. I was the one who had stood up when everyone else bowed down. That realization, more than the court's ruling, gave me back my sense of worth. But closure is a tricky thing. A year after the trial ended, I received another letter in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, written in a handwriting I instantly recognized. Ruth's. It wasn't an apology. Not really. It was more of a confession. She admitted that Daniel had shown her the will years ago, but he'd convinced her that it was better for the family if it stayed hidden. She said she had gone along with him out of fear of losing his protection, fear of being cut off. I chose comfort over you, she wrote, and I will regret that for the rest of my life. I sat with that letter for a long time, my hands trembling. Part of me wanted to shred it, to reject her words the way she had rejected me. But another part of me, the part that still remembered the girl she used to be, felt a pang of sorrow. Because her confession didn't change anything. It didn't erase the years of silence. It didn't erase the way she had looked me in the eye and chosen him over me. All it did was confirm what I already knew. I had been right all along. I folded the letter, placed it in a box with my father's notes, and decided to let it rest there. Not forgiven, not forgotten, just placed among the artifacts of a past I no longer needed to carry in my hands every day. Life moved forward. Slowly, quietly, but forward. I left the Midwest and bought a small place on the coast. The sound of the ocean became my new lullaby. The steady rhythm of the waves reminded me that life is about cycles, loss and renewal, betrayal and truth, endings and beginnings. Sometimes, in the evenings, I walked along the shore and thought about my parents. I wondered if they would be proud of me for fighting, or if they would be sad to see how fractured our family had become. I like to believe it was both. Proud of my strength, but sad that love hadn't been enough to hold us together. People asked me if I would ever reconcile with Daniel. The answer was simple: no. Some betrayals cut too deep to be healed by time or apology. He had stolen more than money. He had stolen my trust, my place in the family, my years of peace. And though I no longer burned with the desire to hurt him back, I also knew I could never welcome him into my life again. That was my final act of revenge. Not anger, not retribution, but indifference. Because indifference means he no longer has power over me. The last time I saw him was purely by chance. I was at the airport, waiting for a flight, when I caught sight of him across the terminal. He looked older, heavier, his once confident stride slower now. Our eyes met for just a moment. There was no smirk this time, no spark of superiority, just weariness. He turned away before I could decide whether to nod or speak, and as I watched him disappear into the crowd, I felt nothing. Not rage, not sorrow, just the quiet confirmation that I had outgrown him, outgrown the chains he once held around me, and that was enough. I share this story not to wallow in pain, but to leave something behind for those who have been silenced the way I was. Betrayal by family is one of the deepest wounds a person can carry. It cuts at the very foundation of who we are. But if you take anything from my story, let it be this. The truth matters. Even if no one believes you, even if it costs you everything, the truth is worth fighting for because it will set you free in ways lies never can. I fought for years. I lost family, I lost friends, I lost a version of myself that wanted to believe love was enough. But in the end, I found something stronger. I found the strength to stand alone and the wisdom to understand that being alone doesn't mean being broken. If you are listening to me right now and you've been betrayed by a sibling, a parent, a friend, know this. Their betrayal does not define your worth. Their lies do not erase your truth. And your scars, though they may ache, are proof of your survival. I used to dream of a happy ending, of sitting around a family table where the wounds had healed and the laughter flowed again. That dream is gone now, and I've made peace with its absence. Instead, my ending is quieter, but truer. Me, by the ocean, free at last from the need for anyone else's validation. And maybe that's the lesson in all of this. Sometimes the justice we get isn't about punishing the ones who hurt us. Sometimes it's simply about reclaiming ourselves, standing taller than the lies, and choosing peace over bitterness. So if this story has touched you, if it has stirred memories or reminded you of your own battles, I ask you to share it. Share it so others know they are not alone. Like this video if you believe the truth is always worth fighting for. Leave a comment. Tell me your story. Tell me your scars. Tell me how you survived. And subscribe, not just to my channel, but to the idea that even through betrayal and loss, we can rise stronger because survival isn't just living. Survival is becoming.